Joined now by our Monday regular, the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada and the co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, Mr. John Shannon, joins as per usual. How you doing, my friend?
Great, boys. How was your weekend?
Yeah, quite good.
Not bad.
What'd you make of the Leafs-Canucks game? It's fun, huh?
Which team's going to the playoffs?
Yeah.
I was really, I was refreshed to see some true emotion from some of those players that I didn't think we would see from, like Giller. I think that was great to see. And the other thing to see is it's amazing how good your team can become when you get quality goaltending. And Thatcher Demko is a quality goaltender. And I wonder, and you have to wonder, is how much different this season would be if you had had a healthy goalie all season.
He was healthy
long.
at the beginning of the year. Alas, the performance wasn't there. You're absolutely right about emotion. John, that might be the last game of emotion we get here amongst the final 20.
That might have been the Stanley Cup
yeah,
final.
exactly. That
Well,
might.
hold on. I don't be saying that, Blake, because the fans are going to rip you for saying it because they thought that Rick Tocchet was making fun of them. I think, it was. Listen, when the Maple Leafs go anywhere in this country, it is a circus. It's a circus, and you know what? When the circus comes to town,
How do you
have fun.
think Luke Shen will blend into that circus?
He'll be fine. Yeah, no. Here's the thing: by the time they get to the playoffs, you wonder whether Luke will even play every game. What happens, and that's what you try to do: is you try to make sure you have enough defensemen to not just get you through the first round, but get you through 4 rounds. Look what Boston has done, the same thing. And they're after the Orlov trade, they're just rotating guys through. Everybody's getting a rest. One night, Grizzly the next. And just making sure that by the time the playoffs start, that Dmitry Orlov is fully acclimatized to Jim Montgomery's system. And I suspect the same thing will happen in Toronto.
What did you make of the deadline at large, John? Because it was sort of took forever to launch. But boy, after we talked to you Monday, did it launch, and did it launch in a big way?
It's funny. We had Doug Armstrong on our show this morning, and we asked him that very question, and he just said it was a confluence of so many things. The flat cap, a really good quality field of unrestricted free agents, guys on the last years of their deals, and then teams that were able to manage their cap well or find loopholes in the cap in order to try to compete against the Boston Bruins in the East. And then in the West, a much more conservative approach. But a lot of it, in the end, I think he felt was, without trying to speak for him, was cap-based, and people felt they couldn't move too much, nor did they have to in order to get to the playoffs.
Outside of Colorado, do you give anyone in the West a chance, or did the East just get too strong here?
Well, here's the reality of the playoffs. It's a war of attrition. By the time you get to that 4th round, how healthy are you? How many, if you look at the East and you say, okay, Tampa, Toronto, going 7 games. Boston, for the sake of argument, Buffalo, 5 games. The advantage the Bruins have by getting out of a series earlier, it creates such a positive effect to stay healthy. The object of being out of the 3rd round, being out of your conference final, is how healthy are you? And how deep are you? Well, most teams got deeper, but we can't answer the health questions until you tell me how difficult it was to win the first 3 rounds. And that, to me, when you look at what the East is, Boston and the Rangers and Carolina and New Jersey and Toronto and Tampa are just going to beat the heck out of each other. They're going to beat the heck out of each other. So does somebody in the West have a chance to win the Stanley Cup final? Sure. Look at Colorado last year, without droning on about this. Colorado last year, I think, had 2 sweeps. And still lost Kadri for a little bit, but stayed healthy enough it made it easier to play against Tampa.
I do subscribe to the theory that when you're in a tough conference, you beat each other up, and by the time you reach the Cup final, you might be too tenderized to take on whoever's coming out of the East as well. So or the West. So that's
well. Remember that last time that Chicago won the Cup, they had 3 healthy defensemen, and held on by their fingernails with Timo Timonen playing about 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Colorado.
Exactly. You need to
Colorado played 4 more games than the minimum. They did sweep Edmonton and Nashville. They went 6 with St. Louis and 6 with Tampa.
Yeah.
The cap gets announced in June usually. Do you suspect that stays the same? As we think about the trade deadline that was, what could that look like next year? Depends on what that number is in June. Mm-hmm. And with all this Bally Sports stuff, what are you thinking is happening there? Because nobody really wants to comment on what's coming down the pike. Do you think we have another flat year, or do you think they go forward as if all that money's not being lost?
Well, they don't have any choice about predicting what money's coming. They have to go with the real numbers. And so next year's cap is going to be based on this year's situation, and most of the Bally money's been paid. So
get to the finish line for this year, yeah.
Right. So I suspect that Gary's pronouncement in December that it's probably going to be around $1 million makes the most sense for the announcement in late June. Ask me a year from now about next year's cap. That's another story. But, I keep talking to tons of people in both countries, league people, broadcast people, and they're not as pessimistic as some of us are when it comes to the revenues that come from regional television in the United States. So we'll just have to wait and see.
What would that do, though, if it only went up $1 million after all that time? We were under the impression it was going 3 to 4. If you had asked us 8 months ago, do you think any organizations were sculpting a team thinking they were going to get 3 to 4 million of a bump in June?
No, I think that we kind of latched onto the 4.5 million number that Gary said at one point last year. But I think teams were probably a lot more cautious. I mean, the team, let's face it, the team that thought, we were supposed to be at close to $100 million by now, guys. We were supposed to be close to $100 million. But the pandemic, affected so many things, and we're still in a little bit of a pandemic hangover business-wise, I think. And so from that perspective, the only team that really pushed the envelope were the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they seem to have gotten themselves out of it at this point. And we'll see what they do in the summertime to get themselves a little more flexible.
Is that why we're starting to hear whispers about expansion, John? Need more revenue, so let's go ahead and get to 34 teams. Kevin Weeks and John Butchagros raising eyebrows last week. We got a question from a listener, Gurmy, who says, ask John what he's heard about expansion to more Sunbelt markets, whether that's Atlanta and Houston or Atlanta and somewhere else. What's up there?
Okay. I have heard absolutely nothing about this. Zero. Zip. Nada. I think what has to happen as part of what's going on business-wise is we have to figure out what's going on in Arizona long-term. They have a referendum coming up in May to build a new entertainment sports facility in Tempe. If that can happen, then that might solidify the Coyotes a bit more. If it doesn't happen, what happens then? So relocation for me, and again, Kevin and John are friends. So when they tweet something out, you have to raise your eyebrow and say, where does that come from? Or are they doing it for a friend, or are they just wishful thinkers like the rest of us? Because, maybe it's more jobs for everyone. But I think that you have to figure out if relocation becomes a bigger factor first. I'm not suggesting it is, but we have to get through the Arizona plebiscite first before we decide everything else is on the move. I just don't see it. I just don't see it at this point.
How can the distant number 4 league in North America become the biggest league in North America? Like that tells me you're spreading yourself pretty thin.
Well, yeah, but the only thing that you say, is that the players don't share in the revenues from expansion. That's the only thing. And so if it's two more teams, then is it $750 million this time? So it's $1.5 billion. And Seattle and Vegas probably don't share in that money at this point. Maybe Vegas does, but Seattle won't. To me, guys, I think this is pie in the sky stuff. I really do. And maybe they're putting it out there just to gauge reaction. I don't know. But it's not one that is very high on my list for sure. And
do you think Atlanta's as bad a sports city as they've shown themselves?
I think, here's the thing. The Braves did the exact opposite of what every other sports team has done in North America. Every other sports team wants to move downtown. The Braves moved to the suburbs. Atlanta is, the traffic grid in Atlanta is horrendous. To get to the arena at downtown Atlanta, whether it was the Omni or the one that they're in now, and I can't even remember the name of it, was always a pain. It was always a pain. It wasn't fun to get to. So the Braves moved to the suburbs and are much more successful in the suburbs. If they had moved put the hockey arena in Buckhorn, they might have been more successful as opposed to downtown. And so Atlanta is a growing city. It's a big city. They got lots of sports fans, but there's lots of sports too. And that becomes the big issue. I just don't, guys. I don't see it. I'm sorry. I don't see it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Houston is the one thing. And the other thing is, we touched on the TV landscape in the United States. A lot of guys, when they build teams and they run their ledger of what their revenues are going to be, they plunk in a number for regional sports television when they do it. You plunk in that number between 20 million and 50 million. Wow, that's not a number you can plunk in right now. I think that there's two question marks in a lot of cities about how much money they're going to get from regional television in the United States, particularly the ones that aren't in New York
Atlanta,
or Boston.
Terrible downtown as well. And Butchergross made mention of Alpharetta, which is a suburb where they do have an ice skating rink. John,
hey, I have an ice skating. I have an ice skating rink. I have two of them within a kilometer of my house.
No, I know.
But we're not putting an NHL. We're not putting an NHL team.
Exactly. But I just there's ice skating, not just roller skating in Alpharetta. Our first chance to talk to you since the Philip Hronek trade from Detroit. What did you make of it?
Well, he's a good player. Is he a great player? I think that remains to be seen. But he's a good player. To me, when you piece the puzzle together and listen to Jimmy's comments at that press conference that started with the Tanner Pearson surgery story, he talked about, finding those 24, 25-year-old, gems out there. The kid, the Ranger kid they got, he's one of those gems, supposedly. Hronek, one of those gems? Yeah, he could be. But this speaks to, they don't want to do a decade rebuild. They don't want to be out of the playoffs more than a couple of years as a group. Now fans can sit there and say, well, we've been out for 3 and it's been, it's horrible for 10. This group can only speak for the time that they've been in charge. They don't want to be out of the playoffs again next year. They've got to find a way to have viable players that can contribute right away. They still have so much work to do. When you think about contracts and depth, but adding a defenseman at 24 that can play in the National Hockey League, as opposed to drafting one and letting him play in junior hockey for another year and seeing what he does in the learning curve. Both of you guys know how long it takes to become a quality NHL defenseman. Mm-hmm. You don't do it not everybody's Quinn Hughes.
Nope.
Not everybody's Quinn Hughes. So, Hronek's not a bad trade. Might be too expensive, but it's not a bad trade.
GT Miller, there was some footsie played with the Pittsburgh Penguins. How do you think they put that genie back in the bottle, or do they? Will you be on the lookout for a Miller trade in the summer before his new deal kicks in?
Well, the draft happens before July 1st now. So I think this is a group that I think you have to think that everything's on the table. It's gone from minor surgery to major surgery. So this is one where the end of this regular season, and so much in my opinion, again, I haven't talked to anybody about this, but it is the relationship between JT Miller and Rick Tocchet. That's going to be to me the telling message for management. If Rick Tocchet says, I've got to him, or he's what we need, then nothing happens. But the deciding vote in all of this just might be the head
spot
coaches.
on. I talked about that earlier in the show, that I think Rick Tocchet lost a couple of physical defenders here in Luke Schenn and Riley Stillman. He's trying to preach a certain way how to play. I think we saw some of that out of Tyler Myers and Dakota Joshua Saturday with the hits on John Tavares, who, by the way, is in a gray practice jersey today for the Leafs in New Jersey. So I do wonder how much of a hand Tocchet is going to have here in shaping the roster.
Well, and there's nothing to say Luke Schenn doesn't come back. So.
That's fair. Yeah, no, everyone seems to think there's a possibility of that, rare as it may be on the NHL free agent market. Marvelous stuff, John. Thanks for this. Catch up soon.
Have a great week, guys.